It's like, what do you think you're doing? Shame on you, Antony. I liked you in Julius Caesar, but shame on you. So I guess it's time to talk about reading Antony and Cleopatra. I've got to be honest with you, I didn't love this one. I really like Shakespeare in general, and I've read a lot of plays by Shakespeare. And maybe it's just that I didn't love it in comparison to other plays by Shakespeare that I've read, because, there's such a variety of them that everybody's going to have different taste. I don't think it was bad or poorly written by any means. It just wasn't necessarily, when I compare it to other plays by Shakespeare that I've read, it wasn't necessarily my cup of tea. I'm actually kind of running low on Shakespeare plays to read. I've got still quite a few comedies that I haven't read, and I think 2 of the histories. But aside from Antony and Cleopatra, which I've now finished, I believe the only 2 tragedies that I have left are Timon of Athens and Titus Andronicus. I've read Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Macbeth, Julius Caesar, King Lear. I've read way too many of them to list, but in any case, let's talk about which ones I thought it was the most similar to and what I thought the differences were. I think the obvious comparison is Romeo and Juliet, because it's the story of 2 lovers whose story ends in a very tragic way. In both cases, the 2 lovers commit suicide. And so, let's talk about why it's different from Romeo and Juliet. I actually find it a lot easier to empathize with the characters from Romeo and Juliet because, they're teenagers whose families are feuding. They have feelings for each other, but their parents are saying, no, you can't. And what do you do when you're a teenager and your parents tell you you can't do something or you can't be with somebody that you like? You rebel, right? I think that the story of Romeo and Juliet makes sense because they are headstrong teenagers experiencing their first, I don't even know if I want to call it love, but infatuation for sure. And at that age, it's really not hard to believe that people would be super headstrong and rebellious and make rash decisions. I have to say, I don't have that sympathy for Antony and Cleopatra, and not so much for the way that it ends, because there are other factors involved there that we will get to in a little bit, but more the fact that they are together in the first place, because, he is married. Okay, I get, in the beginning, kind of, but then his wife passes away, and he goes back to Rome and immediately marries another woman, while fully intending to continue his affair with Cleopatra. And that just drives me up a wall. It's like, what do you think you're doing? Shame on you, Antony. I liked you in Julius Caesar, but shame on you. That brings me to the other play that I think it has a lot in common with, which is Julius Caesar, because they both are set in ancient Rome around the same time. Antony and Cleopatra takes place a little bit later than Julius Caesar, but generally same time period. They feature one of the same characters, Mark Antony, and before anything else, they both are stories of historical, political tragedies, you might say. This isn't like A Midsummer Night's Dream where it takes place in a historical setting, but really the setting is just window dressing and the story is completely out of Shakespeare's imagination. These are loosely based on real historical events. And more so than anything else, they're concerned with the politics of the Roman Empire. Or, in Julius Caesar, it was not the Roman Empire yet, but what quickly became the Roman Empire after Julius Caesar's death. So with that being the case, the love affair between Antony and Cleopatra may be the title of the play, but it's only a part of the main story. The main story is about a war between Rome and Egypt, between Caesar Octavius and Mark Antony, and all of the events that lead up to the deaths of the 2 lovers. I find the whole conspiracy to assassinate Caesar in Julius Caesar, or even the story in Coriolanus where there's this war hero who comes home and becomes a politician and is completely horrible at it, I find both of those to be much more compelling than what happens in Antony and Cleopatra. It just didn't do it for me. I know that it's generally very well regarded and that there's probably a lot of literary value in it and the way that it explores the historical events that are portrayed. And, much like Shakespeare's other historical works, I seriously doubt that it's all historically accurate because goodness knows the history plays, the English history plays are definitely not. I'm sure there is a lot of value in seeing what Shakespeare and people in the Renaissance thought about ancient Egypt and ancient Rome. And it's an interesting time period. The ancient world is kind of fascinating, and I really enjoyed Julius Caesar. I said that we would come back to the other factors at play in what Antony and Cleopatra eventually decide to do, because it's not just a rash, I can't live without my beloved kind of decision like Romeo and Juliet. In Cleopatra's case particularly, it has a lot to do with not wanting to be defeated, not wanting to be taken back to Rome as a prisoner, wanting to die on her own terms rather than be left at Caesar's mercy. So there too, even though the obvious comparison is Romeo and Juliet, the play has so much more in common with Julius Caesar, where everything is a political decision or a question of honor or, things like that, as opposed to just two teenage idiots in love. I really don't know, how Shakespeare intended the reader to feel about the characters. I really liked Mark Antony and Julius Caesar, but I really disliked him in this one. I just felt like a lot of his choices were utter stupidity. And then Cleopatra, I actually thought was pretty interesting just in terms of how she interacts with all of these powerful men. I thought that was fascinating because women in Shakespeare's plays often tend to be a little bit passive, and she definitely was not. Even if she wasn't out there, fighting in battles and whatnot, she still definitely played an active role in the political games. I also kind of got the feeling that you're not meant to like her very much, though. So, I don't know. When I do these videos, I usually end by saying who I would recommend it for. This one I would recommend if you really like reading Shakespeare and you want to read as many of Shakespeare's plays as possible, or if you really like ancient Rome and ancient Egypt and that time period in history and you're interested in reading a different perspective on that from looking back at it from the Renaissance era. I don't know that I would recommend it if you are new to reading Shakespeare or if you're unfamiliar with that era, because I would think that it would be a lot to just dive headfirst into. But I definitely think that it's worth reading depending on what your interests are. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it and you would like to see more like this, feel free to subscribe. I post twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays.